Welcome everyone to another SBSN English class podcast. Today we'll be discussing Shakespeare's Macbeth. I'm joined by student Bob Lee. Hello, Bob.
Oh, hello. My first question is, how and why is Macbeth significant? Like, why we need to read it as student?
Yes, many students do ask that question. I think the typical answer is it teaches us about the dangers of ambition, greed. Um, Anything else? I'm not sure.
Sure. That question is like acceptable and generalized.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
true.
So, and I personally don't find it entertaining, but obviously it's made for entertainment. So,
Absolutely.
what made that entertaining for them?
Um, I think it was primarily entertaining because it confirms all their prejudices. Witches are evil. Scottish people can't take care of themselves. It was written for English people, of course. And anyone who dares to kill a king will suffer greatly. And women, you should never listen to women, witches or wives. So
Okay. So about the witches, do witch actually controls the fate, or like does women, witches like witches, do witches actually control people's fate, or they just uh manipulate you to do something to achieve their goals?
yeah, that is a philosophical question. Um, I think the best answer to it is to look at what happens to Banquo and his children. I don't think there's a good chance or much chance that they will inherit the Scottish throne, uh, despite the witch's prophecies. Malcolm becomes the new king, and as I've argued before, he's really just a puppet for the English rulers,
Yes.
conquerors.
I heard there's a rumor saying that King James is related to Banquo. Is that like true?
I've never heard of that. Banquo would be an unusual friend to have because he's not Scottish. He doesn't have a Scottish name.
So Banquo is not a Scottish name.
It's the only name in the play, I think, that, well, not counting the English ones, the English characters. He's the only character with a non-Scottish, non-English name. It's definitely a Latin name, probably Spanish.
Spanish name?
Yeah, well, that will take us in another direction. I'm quite convinced that Shakespeare meant us to interpret Banquo as a banker,
Banker.
and no war can be funded without
Banker.
bankers, right? And every war needs funding. They are so expensive.
Yes. And okay, here I'm kind of like jumping around.
No problem.
But why does the Scottish welcome the English troop? Like they
Why?
probably pillaged.
Could you repeat that?
They probably looted village. So yeah, why would they welcome the English troops?
Yeah, I've never thought of that, but it's obviously true. In most historical cases of war, wherever a large army marches, uh, they do tend to bring disaster with them, looting villages, especially if, of course, if they're in enemy territory. Um, they might even burn food supplies, stocks, fields. So your question is, why would they welcome?
English troop, even though that Macbeth have not clearly done something bad to the population.
Right. There is no good answer to that. It's the question is for Shakespeare. Why did you want us to believe that an English army could march into Scotland and kind of be welcomed there.
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah. And of course, for Shakespeare, it has to be portrayed that way because he wants the English army to seem like the liberators of Scotland. Historically, that was not the case. They were the conquerors of Scotland.
Yeah, just like colonist, colonialist.
Colonialism, yes, absolutely. Although the relationship with Scotland was a bit friendlier than with traditional colonized countries, uh, Ireland included. Ireland was not so lucky.
Yes. And do you think that Shakespeare intended to serve king, or he just made one for? It's like, do did he make the play for the king, or he's an independent intellectual?
Oh, yeah, good question. Absolutely, he is the former. He is working for the king. He is a paid entertainer. Uh, the fact that you and I don't find him entertaining doesn't disprove that. Somehow, his audience thought that this play was entertaining. And actually, people today still find it entertaining, but it's a little mysterious to me, let us say.
Yeah. Yes.
Um,
And yeah, sure.
we could expand and, in what ways, what evidence is there that it's written specifically for King James? How does it, what's the word, cater to his desires, his needs, whatever? I think the inclusion of the witches was definitely intended to appeal to King James, who believed in witches and feared them, thought they were evil. Shakespeare does his best to confirm that with very biased portrayals of pagan women, portraying them as non-human, super evil women. Secondly, King James was terrified of treason, so in this play we have treason twice. And anything else? It doesn't. Nothing else comes to mind right now. Although you might add that King James was also very Christian, and Macbeth's religion abandons him, or he abandons his religion. He's unable to say Amen after killing the king. So there's a very strong Christian, pro-Christian thread here. There's probably more.
King James comes from Scotland, right?
Yes.
So, and Shakespeare portrays Scottish people as not being able to rule themselves. So that won't that get Shakespeare himself into trouble?
Right.
Since he's like the king's servant.
Yeah, it's a complex point. I think King James, being part of the ruling class, would have been happy to embrace his new role as the ruler of not just Scotland, but of the fledgling, the young English empire that was starting to grow. The ruling class tends to think of itself as better than the rest of their own people. And he probably would have accepted the fact that he's now the English king quite happily.
So he just betrayed his nation. Like Macbeth.
In a way, he's a traitor, of course, but he probably would have excused himself and said, well, now I am, Scotland should be happy because now it has a Scottish descended ruler in England.
That does not care about Scott.
Probably not much. No, there were probably worse kings than King James. He wasn't a warmonger. He had some other issues, personal ones, but he was not the conquering, bloodthirsty king that King Macbeth is portrayed as.
Yes. Um, the main character of Macbeth is Macbeth. He's like portrayed as a valiant hero. So many people say it's like he's a tragic hero. What's your stand on this point?
I couldn't disagree more. Um, I don't think Shakespeare wanted his English audience to be impressed by a Scottish fighter or a Scottish king, or feel sorry for the tragic fall of a Scottish character. To be blunt, I'm sure his English audience was far too proud and racist to, what's the word, experience tragedy associated with foreigners. It just wouldn't make sense. And there's plenty of evidence in the text that Shakespeare did not want us to imagine that Macbeth is a ruler. Oh, sorry, a hero. Excuse my mysterious guest. One of the strongest bits of evidence that Shakespeare did not intend for us to treat Macbeth as a hero is the fact that Macbeth he is a war hero, or he's portrayed as a great soldier, but it's overkill. He is ruthless. He is savage beyond all civilized code for conduct on the battlefield.
Yes. And I have a follow-up question with that. See, a lot of heroes are war-made, right? Like General Patton.
Yeah.
And a lot of bad guy, ruthless guys are also war-made, like you said, Macbeth. So those two looks kind of similar to me.
Patton and Macbeth.
Like just using Patton as example, someone
Yeah.
who fight ruthlessly and valiantly on
Right.
war might be portrayed as hero, but someone else like Macbeth would be portrayed as not hero.
So this might be related to the fact that King James wasn't a big warmonger. It was not his hobby as it is for so many ruling elites. And Macbeth is not English, so he can't be a hero. It's very simple.
So if Macbeth was an English guy, which if this play happened in England, just if, that will never happen, but like
Yeah.
he will be a war hero.
I think so, yeah. He would be portrayed slightly differently. Not someone who listens to witches, not someone who listens to his wife. And did you want to look at a couple of lines? The line in which Macbeth is compared to the Roman soldier at Golgotha?
Sure, we can put it. You can put it up.
Yeah, I'll share screen.
And maybe read it.
Sure, I'll have to find it. Shouldn't take long. Okay, I'll read the modern English.
Yeah, to just be understandable.
Yes, and my thanks to the Spark Notes website. Maybe they wanted to take a bath in their enemy's blood. That's the captain speaking about Banquo and Macbeth. Or make that battlefield as infamous as Golgotha, where Christ was crucified. So these two allusions are very powerful. The taking a bath in enemy's blood, that doesn't seem flattering to me. In fact, it's an allusion to some propaganda, English propaganda of that century, I think, in which Queen Mary was associated with blood drinking, and another queen in Hungary was I shouldn't say associated with, but demonized by claims that she was bathing in young women's blood or young people's blood. So it was a common insult or piece of propaganda to demonize foreign rulers. Secondly, the allusion to the Golgotha, that being the site in the Middle East where Jesus was allegedly crucified, is also not very flattering for Macbeth, because in this case he's being compared to the Roman soldier who killed Christ. So that's the opposite of a flattering allusion. That's Macbeth being compared to the enemy of all Christians, I suppose. And of course, Macbeth's or King James's audience was Christian.
Yeah, I'm probably thinking about like the bathing in blood part is probably like hyperbole.
I don't know what else to call it. It's hyperbole, yes, in the service of
Demonizing.
yeah, and it's hyperbole borrowed from, as I said, the historical cases where the same image was used to demonize real people. Two female rulers.
Yeah. I have a question related to the what is it called? Welcoming English troops stuff. This question is: should self-elected peacemaker intervene in civil wars or like civil conflicts?
Yeah, it's not a literary question, it's a political question, I think.
Okay. We should just skip it.
We could, but it's a very relevant question, since our neighbors to the south have this habit of intervening quite regularly in so-called civil wars. Shakespeare did portray the situation in Scotland as if it were almost a civil war. It's really just an argument between the ruling class nobles. Some are not happy with Macbeth. Of course, Macbeth is happy being the king.
Is he happy though?
No, he's not happy. You're right. Yeah, if you ask me, should we ever intervene in another country's affairs, civil wars? I don't think so. Intervening usually means dropping bombs on them anyway. Not very helpful. If we can intervene in some constructive manner, I'm open-minded.
Okay. So, I think sometimes names are important, as in most novels and stories, tattletales, or like stuff like that.
Right.
So, what does like the names represent in Macbeth?
Yes, well, I have a kind of a humorous guess about Duncan's name. In English, as you know, the letter C can be pronounced as a hard K or as a soft S. So it could be Duncan, or could it be Dunsun? We have a location name in the play, Dunsinane, spelled with an S. It seems very coincidental. Duncan, to my mind, is not very bright. He gets betrayed twice, and he trusts the reports of the captain, and is it Ross? Probably shouldn't have. We can talk about that later. So I think Duncan's name may have been a pun on the word dunce or idiot, and maybe they pronounced it Dunson. Dunson.
Dunce?
Yes.
Okay.
And Dunson's sons also have interesting names, Malcolm and Donalbain. The MAL in Malcolm could be treated as a prefix. The prefix MAL is Latin. It means bad or sick. And Donald Bain, the last four letters B-A-I-N, is a homophone for the English word bane, B-A-N-E, which also means evil or bad. Probably not coincidental.
That's a pretty humorous way of analyzing the names, I'll say.
Yes. I think Shakespeare wanted us to understand that all the Scottish characters are not
Stupid.
so smart, not so good.
Unable to rule themselves, let's say.
Pardon?
Unable to rule themselves.
Correct. Yeah, they need King Edward to come, the amazing Christ-like King Edward.
Okay. So after all of those messes, who is the biggest winner at the end of the play?
The biggest
Who
winner?
is biggest gainer? Who gained a lot? Well, like Macbeth, he become the king, but he's not happy.
Right.
And obviously Malcolm, he's supposed to be the king, so after being the king, he did not gain anything from this.
Right. Then there's only one party left that gained much. That is the English. We can be sure that they didn't save Scotland as a favor, that they would have benefited from this somehow. And that is hinted at the end of the play. If we can have a quick look at the text there. Malcolm's last speech, he is king at this point, and he says, my thanes and kingsmen, I name you all earls, the first earls that Scotland has ever had. This means they are no longer thanes and are now earls. This sounds trivial to us, but it indicates that that Scotland has switched over to the English system and has become an extension of England, as it is to this day. You know, they still don't have their independence. And this play kind of signifies the end of their original independence.
So Macbeth have no sons, so why would he care about Banquo's son taking the throne?
That's a good question. There's no good way to answer that. It kind of exposes, as you point out, something illogical in the play. I think Shakespeare's purpose was just to make Macbeth appear as evil as possible, and yeah, not worry about the logic. There are many illogical points actually in this play. I think it's not logic then perhaps, but history. There was nothing to fear in witches. Witches didn't really exist. So we might also ask, why did he include witches? Was he also superstitious? Probably, yes, yeah. I don't think he was independent-minded. I think he shared all the fears and prejudices of his class. Or of the class he worked for.
Now, what's your stand on how is Macbeth significant and why we should read it?
Well, maybe you can answer that question first. What's your impression?
I think Macbeth is about political, psychological, about how people think and act, and culture. Right.
Right.
That's my opinion. You can see the culture through the book.
It is psychological. Right. It is psychological. I don't think it's very insightful in terms of psychology. I don't think people who execute their leaders are necessarily going crazy.
Yeah.
There might be some who would celebrate for the rest of their lives. You know, but Shakespeare would never write a play like that, because this play has to warn people against killing kings. It has to maintain the belief that kings are sacred. It has to promote that. So yes, revolution is bad, rebellion is bad, executing a king is bad. Doesn't matter what kind of king it is, really. All right, perhaps we'll do another discussion of this text or another later.
Yes.
Very good. This is the end of another SBSN English podcast. Wishing
Thank you,
everyone a good
Mr.
night.
Peter.
Thank you, Bob.
Yes.